Hello, I'm Mark Conley. I'd like to talk to you about the reading needs of the adults that you'll encounter. I'm going to talk to you about three different kinds of adults that you'll run into. People that I call have emergent literacy needs, people that have early literacy needs, and people that need extra work on comprehension. But before I get into that, I want to talk a little bit about the adults themselves. One of the really interesting things about working with adults in Literacy Mid-South is that I've rarely run into a single one that's alike like any other. They range in ages from 18 to 80. They have many, many different kinds of life experiences, and I think that's a really important thing to remember before you even think about teaching reading to them. So it's really critical when you think about the information I'm going to give you that you think first of all about the person who sits in front of you. You want to know about what they're trying to achieve, what kinds of experiences that they've had. I often say that if you find yourself teaching a lesson that seems like you're teaching a linguistics lesson, that you're probably not quite on the right track. You want to make sure that no matter what you do, you tie it into the purposes and needs of the adults that are sitting in front of you. So spend a little time getting to know them. So let's start out with the first kind of adult that you'll run into. People that have emergent literacy needs. These are really, really basic needs that have to do with not necessarily knowing the alphabet, not necessarily knowing how sounds and symbols go together, what we call phonemic awareness. They don't have a sense of what a whole word is. When I work with people, even young children that are at this stage, when you first sit down with them and you read with them, hopefully taking turns reading, you'll see particular kinds of patterns that will show you that they don't necessarily have a sense of what a whole word is. They'll pronounce beginning consonants, beginnings of words. They might pronounce ends of words. They rarely pronounce whole words. One of the sure telltale signs that they're emergent readers is that when they come across a word that they don't know, they'll skip it, but they don't necessarily know how to approach it. And what you'll find happening, if you ask them the question, what happens, what do you do when you come to a word you don't know? Quite often they'll say some of the least efficient strategies, which are things like rereading the words or just saying them over again. They don't have necessarily a sense of different kind of options that they would use to kind of figure out the words, like looking at the words around it or looking at pictures or anything like that. So these are very, very much emergent kind of readers. To work with them, one of the things that I like to do is first of all try to figure out where they are with things. And with each of the readers that I'm going to describe here, I basically use the same kind of technique. And so I'll have something to read. You can ask them to bring something to read, or you can have something there. Keep it relatively simple, like a newspaper or a magazine that has ads in it. And keeping along with the spirit of collaborating with them, don't put them on the spot and just say, here, read this. But say, I'd like to read something with you, and you read a little bit of it, and they'll read a little bit of it. And what I want you to do is watch for patterns. And so with the emergent reader, we're going to see patterns where they only have kind of a partial understanding of language. It could be anything where they don't want to read at all, or they show that they don't necessarily know what a whole word is like. And that's really the indicator, not knowing what whole words are, which will tell you that this is an emergent reader. Now what I've done in the past, and some of our other presenters will have other ideas for you that'll build on this, is I've used a technique called language experience approach with emergent readers. And what it is basically talk written down. What you'll find is that a lot of emergent readers have learned how to cope by using oral language. And so that it often tends to be a strength that they have. And so what I'll do is I'll say, okay, I'd like you to tell me about something that's interesting to you. When I did this before with a young kid, there was a young kid who was going to a Yankees baseball game. So I said, tell me about that. And when he got all excited and he started telling me about that, I wrote it down on a piece of paper. Now, since he was just an emergent reader, I only wrote down a sentence or two. So this is the important part. In the spirit of collaboration, I asked Michael to read it back to me. And since it's already something that he said, he's already got a leg up on actually reading the print. And what you're trying to do is connect what he said to what's actually on the page. And that's a beginning point in terms of developing his print awareness. Now, what you can do once you created an experience story is you can take some of the words from the story. You can have him select some, or you can select some. And you can create reading exercises out of it. So one very common reading exercise is to take parts of words, like you might take ball, take the B off of it, put a T on it, call it tall, and do some wordplay. I usually use index cards when I do that. We have a technique called push it and say it, where you take the beginnings of the words and the endings of the words and you push them together and you say what that word creates. So once you have the experience stories, then you can create a whole variety of reading kinds of exercises. The lesson plan design that is fairly typical and important for doing this, and we'll have others that we're developing at the same time. You always start with doing some reading, and then you get into the reading instruction itself. Hopefully maybe you'll do a little bit of writing, and always end with some reading. Ideally, the reading that you pick for the beginning and end is reading that they're interested in. It's pleasure reading, or it might be related to a goal that they have. The goals among our adults are going to be quite a wide variety. But always use what they're interested in as kind of the stuff or the most important part of the work that you do with them. The second group of readers is what I call the early readers, and these are readers that have bits and pieces of understanding about language. When you do the oral reading kind of assessment with them, what you'll see is that they can pronounce whole words. They know what a whole word is. But a real telltale sign that they are in the early reading categories, they might read kind of haltingly. But more importantly, when they come to words that they don't know, particularly more than one syllable, they have no idea about how to attack the word. And so they have no sense of strategy. And like I said before, quite often they'll only have one strategy and it's kind of ineffective. I'd like to stop right now and have you think about, when you come to a word that you don't know, what are some of the alternatives that you use to figure it out? So as with the emergent readers, it's important to begin and end with pleasure reading or reading that's of interest to them. But another technique that people use that's helpful is that since these folks are not quite comfortable with reading, you do a combination of shoring up their understanding of how to approach words and how to unpack them. They can be things like looking at the words around it or context. It could be things like they see a word that they don't know and they think of parts of the word that are familiar to them from other words. The other thing is to develop some fluency. One of the issues with fluency, if you're familiar with teaching or reading at church or reading in a public space, a lot of times you're focusing so much on the reading performance that you don't comprehend much. If you're having trouble with fluency, that's part of a lot of your reading experience. So you need to kind of get people a little bit more comfortable and feeling less public in their reading. And one of the techniques that people use is to do repeated readings of the same passage and do 1-minute readings. And because of the familiarity of the repeated readings, eventually they just kind of settle down and they focus on just reading the words, and it tends to develop some comfort. Now, one word of caution is that ultimately we don't want them to focus on speed of reading. What we want them to focus on is flexibility. What will help them a lot is some wide reading, so take some time to read something that's a little less thoughtful, like maybe the local newspaper or a magazine, and talk about your experiences reading something harder and something that's a little bit easier, and how you change your purpose and your approach to reading, and that'll help them a lot. The third group of readers are what I call the comprehenders, and one of the things that I found interesting in talking to some of our adults is that they always have a purpose why they're there, anywhere from a grandmother trying to help her 6-year-old with his homework to a guy who is an electrician who flips houses on the south side of Memphis, and he's trying to become a better businessman, and he feels that if he could read better, that would happen. And so with comprehenders, the thing that characterizes them is they know how to read. They read fine. They don't have problems with reading fluency per se, but they're trying to read to accomplish something. And so the connection that they're trying to make is between the reading and completing some sort of a task. I think one of the conceptions of the adults is that a lot of them are just trying to get driver's licenses and apartments, and a lot of them are. But a lot of them have a lot of other kinds of goals that can be quite sophisticated, like trying to get into a particular kind of educational program. One guy I talked to wanted to become a counselor like the person who had helped him. And so the materials for the comprehenders end up being the materials that they're trying to master to accomplish something in their lives. And so those become kind of the stuff of lessons. You want to watch for anything that they need extra help with that signals that maybe they think that they need to read everything in the same way. Focus on flexibility. focus on how to look at tasks that they have to perform and then look back at the reading to figure out what information that they need to draw from to be able to complete the task. This is where you can really be helpful in terms of their own personal kinds of goals. So those are the three kinds of readers that we talk about: the emergent readers, the early readers, and the comprehenders. Some of the other presentations will then begin to build on this and then talk about specific sorts of strategies. But what I hope you do is that when you first come, take some time to really think about how they're reading and kind of which one of these pockets they fit into, emergent, early, or comprehender, and adapt your instruction accordingly. Mostly, I'd like to thank you for coming out. We really value our tutors who come to work with the people across our county, and I thank you for volunteering.